Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Alka Joglekar and I will be a counselor for the topic of system investigation. Let us start with the first slide. What exactly is system investigation? System investigation is another term for requirement analysis. That doesn't help us much at all, does it? Because then the question is, what is requirement analysis? Requirement analysis is the analysis of the needs of the user. Now before we go any further, let us sidetrack a little bit to find out a little bit more about users. Users are the most important components in the system. Systems are made for the users. Unfortunately, many system investigators are so wrapped up in technology, they are so carried away by technology that they design state-of-the-art systems which are finally useless for the users because they don't satisfy their needs. The systems may be technologically very advanced, they may be very complex, but if they don't meet the user's requirements, then they are useless. The most important thing to remember here is that for a system to be useful to a user, the system must satisfy the user's needs and the user must be comfortable with the system. If the user is comfortable with the calculator and if the calculator is satisfying the needs of the user, then let him stick to a calculator. Don't give him a computer. Always give the user what he wants, not what you want him to have. The next thing which we have to consider is to identify all the users. To identify the users, the most important tool is the organizational chart. We will be talking a lot more about the chart a little bit later on, but what we have to remember at this stage is that the chart should be accurate and it should be complete. It should be accurate because an inaccurate chart or a wrong chart would mean that some lines of control are missing from the chart, which would give you a wrong picture about the control structures of the organization. The chart has to be complete because an incomplete chart would mean that some levels or some people are missing from the chart, which again would mean that you don't have the complete list of the end users. You must remember that all organizational charts do not include some of the lower level people like the service staff or the support staff or the clerical staff. Your chart must include them because they are very important end users. The last thing to see in the users is how to classify them. Users can be classified in two different ways. The first classification is the user who is actually going to use your system. The second one is the user who is not going to use your system directly but who is definitely going to be affected by it. To take some examples, a reservation clerk in a hotel is a user who is going to use your system directly because he is the one who is going to check in the details of the guest who is going to enter the hotel. Or let's take a payroll clerk who is going to actually enter the details of the leave or the attendance of an employee whose payroll is to be processed. The second classification, the users who are not going to use the system but who are going to be affected by it. The best example for this is the finance department, because any system you take, let's take a purchase system, the finance department is not going to use it but it will definitely be affected by it. Now this was all about the users. Let us now go back to where we left off. What is requirement analysis? Requirement analysis is the analysis of the needs of the user. Requirement analysis is also the study of the current system. What does the user want from the current system? What are his projected requirements? How does he operate the system right now? All this is requirement analysis. Requirement analysis is also the analysis of the wish list of the user. What is this wish list? A wish list is a list of all possible requirements, the desires, the needs that a user can think of at this point in time. Let's take some examples. Let's say a store's room clerk. He wishes for a system whereby the system would automatically update the stocks of an item the minute the item crosses into the store. Or let's take a hotel manager. He may wish for a system which would automatically switch off the lights in the hotel room as soon as the guest leaves the room. You must remember at this stage that some of the items in the wish list may be impractical, some may be uneconomical, and some may be outside the scope of the system. We will get back to what the scope of the system is a bit later. The most important thing at this stage is to make sure that you list out all possible requirements that the user can think of at this point in time. Okay. The next thing which we should look at is the importance of requirement analysis. Whenever a builder builds a house, he has to first study the laws of the land and the actual land where he is going to build the house. There are rules and regulations which define where he can build high rises, where he can build shopping malls, and where he cannot build anything at all because it's a green belt. So he must first study the rules and the regulations before actually starting any construction. Similarly, a doctor, he cannot start operating on a patient just like that. He has to first diagnose the patient properly. He has to conduct a battery of tests, examine the patient, maybe confer with other doctors to find out what exactly is wrong with the patient, and then only then decide whether the patient has to be operated upon or not. System investigation is exactly similar to that. Until you study the current system properly, until you find out what exactly the problem is, you cannot really identify the solution or design a system accordingly. The next thing, what do you think successful project teams do? Successful projects, what they do is they spend 50% of their time and effort on analysis. Then they spend about 30% of their time and effort on design. And they spend the remaining 20% only on development. Now this shatters the popular myth that programming is the key to successful projects. It is not. Programming is merely a tool. It is only as good as the system and the design, system analysis and the design. So the main skill of the system investigator lies in the analysis and in the design. Okay. Remember, when you are going to be doing the system investigation, you have to be a detective to find out exactly what is wrong with the system, to dig out potential problems and existing problems. You have to be a charmer who is able to deflect any antagonism that the user might have, and who is able to overcome any mental block that the user might have for new things in general and for computers in particular. Okay, how do you go about requirement analysis? The answer is simple. You ask questions. What kind of questions? Whom to ask the questions? What is the information that you need? Why is this particular information required? When is the right time to ask questions? And where is the right place to ask questions? We'll go through it one by one. The first thing, whom should we ask? Should we talk to the chairman, or should we talk to the marketing manager, or should we talk to the security guard? It is very important to identify the correct person who is going to answer your questions properly. Again, the organizational chart comes to a help. Let's take a look at an organizational chart. Okay. If you see the chart, what you can see is there are certain lines of control in that. For example, you have the floor supervisor who is reporting to the manager operations, who is in turn reporting to the VP operations, who is reporting to the chairman. This line of control is very clear, not hidden at all, absolutely not ambiguous at all, clear. However, there will be some lines of control in an organizational chart which are not clear, which are hidden, which are invisible, but which are very crucial. For example, let's take the HRD manager. He may be the chairman's wife, sister, brother-in-law. So whatever you talk to the HRD manager, whatever attitudes you present to him are going to get communicated directly to the chairman. You have to be very careful of these lines of control. You have to keep your eyes and ears open to make sure that you find out what these lines of control are and be wary of them. They are hidden, so it is more and more difficult to do it, but they are very crucial because they affect the relationship which you are going to have with the user. Take another look at the organizational chart. You will see that it is divided into three basic levels: the top management, the middle management, and the junior management. This classification of the chart into these three levels is what constitutes the Newman-Hadas model. The Newman-Hadas model says that the senior management or the top management is involved with strategic planning. They are involved more with the long-term goals of the company. What the company is going to look like in the next 5 years is what the senior management is going to consider. The middle management is more involved with the medium-term goals. They look after the proper or the optimum utilization of the resources of the company, for example, manpower or equipment or material, to achieve the medium-term goals of the company. The junior management is what looks after the day-to-day operational issues of the company, how the labor force or how the workforce is going to be utilized. That is what the junior management does. Let's take an example and see if it illustrates this point clearly. When you are preparing a customer bill, the procedure for preparing the bill or the information which is going to go into the bill, you should ask the junior manager for that information. If you want to find out the policies for giving discounts to special customers, then you should ask the middle management. In case you want to find out how the customer profile is going to change in the next 5 years by the introduction of, say, a mail order business, then you should talk to the senior management. Okay. The next thing, what is the information that you're going to ask? Each and every system consists of 8 basic characteristics which we have to study. These characteristics are, first, the goals of a system. Each and every system is created, is constituted with a reason. It has a purpose. That is the goal of the system. The goal could be a long-term goal, for example, setting up a chain of specialty restaurants all over the country, or it could be a short-term goal, for example, setting up of a single fast food outlet in the locality. That is the goal of the company. Then the inputs. The inputs are the resources used by the organization, like material, like manpower, like equipment, etc. The outputs. The outputs are the results which are achieved from the organization. The results or the outputs could be goods, for example, furniture from a factory, or leather handbags from a leather workshop, or they could be services, for example, legal consultation from a lawyer's office, or a project feasibility report from a management consultancy firm. Then boundaries. Each and every system has a definite scope. It has definable limits. It may be a very ideal situation to imagine that all the needs of an organization can be satisfied by a single system. However, it is not practical at all. Remember that wish list we talked about, where the hotel manager was wishing that he would have a system whereby the room lights would be switched off as soon as the guest leaves the room. Now, if you are going to consider a guest reservation system, then this particular item in the wish list will be outside the scope of that system, because this item in the wish list is concerned more with the physical guest room, and the system is concerned with the guest reservations. After the boundaries, the next characteristic to consider is the environment, which is the external factors which are going to affect the system to make it either more or less difficult to perform. Next, the components. The components is the processing factors which transform an input into an output, and the interrelations are the links which combine or which connect 2 or more components together. Let's take an example to illustrate this. Consider automobile industry. You have various machines which work on a particular unit, and a number of units are connected together to form the final product, which is a car. In this case, the individual units are the inputs, the output is the car, the machines which work on these inputs are the components, and maybe the conveyor belt which connects 2 or more machines together is the interrelation. The last characteristic which we shall consider is the constraint. The constraint is a limitation on the system which affects system performance. Now, this constraint could be social, it could be technical, it could be behavioral. For example, if the machine which you are using, the computer which you are using is very old and it takes a long time for the system to do its job, then that is a technical constraint. If you have 2 or more co-workers who don't get along well together, and therefore each of them is not giving optimum performance, that maybe is a behavioral constraint. So these are the 8 characteristics which we have to study and which we have to find out about each system. Let's take an example. It's a simplistic example, a small example. Let's take a payroll processing in a company. The inputs are the attendance details and the leave details which are processed, the tax structure was studied, and the pay slips are printed, and the provident fund register is also maintained. Let us see if we can list out the 8 basic characteristics of the system using this example. The first characteristic is the goal. The goal is printing of the pay slips. Inputs, the inputs are the attendance details and the leave records. Outputs are the pay slips which are printed and distributed, and the provident fund register which is maintained. The boundaries of this particular system is the payroll processing department or the payroll processing cell. Now, any other department or any other cell in the human resources division will not be a part of this system. It will be outside the scope or outside the boundary of the system. The environment is the tax structure or the tax laws which are going to affect the payroll processing. The components and the interrelations is the payroll processing program or the suite of programs which is going to be used for the processing. The constraints could be that maybe the inputs are available, the attendance details and the leave records are available only 2 days before the processing, or as in the earlier case, the computer used was very old and therefore the system, the payroll processing takes a long time. These are what we have to consider when we look at all the systems. The next question, which is most important, and that is why. Why is that particular information required? Why is really the crux of system investigation? It is the crux because it is the most important thing you are considering. It tells you not to accept anything at face value and to keep digging deeper and deeper to find out exactly why something is happening. Okay. It is also epitomizes the spirit of inquiry, which really is system investigation. So remember, why is something being done is a very, very important question. Let's take an example. You have a purchase order being prepared in the purchase department. You have 2 copies of the purchase order being retained in the purchase department. 1 copy sent to the customer, 1 to the records, 1 to stores, 1 to receiving, and 1 to finance. Okay. Once you start your system investigation, you have to ask, why are these copies sent where they are? What is the department concerned doing with these copies? Once you start asking the question why, you may discover that out of the 2 copies which are sent to purchase, one of them is being sent because 5 years back they had a problem with termites and all the records have been destroyed, and since then they keep an extra copy, a spare copy, in a steel cabinet which is termite proof. You may also discover that the stores department does nothing at all with the purchase order. It just files it and forgets about it. The minute you start asking the question why, you will discover redundancy. As you can see in that example, the second copy to purchase is totally redundant. The copy to stores is totally redundant. So remember, when you ask the question why, one more thing, you will not be a very popular person. In any case, when you go into system investigation of an organization, you are not going to be popular because the user will keep thinking that you are going to pick holes into the system. You are trying to question his methods, the way he has been doing something for the past so many years. You are going to question his relationship with the subordinates. You are going to question the way he is handling his department. So even if he feels that something is wrong with the system, you will be the last person he will tell. He will vehemently defend his own system and refuse to accept that anything is wrong with it, or even say that anything needs to be done further to it. In spite of this, what you have to remember is that you will have to dig deeper and deeper and find the real reasons for something. Don't accept anything at face value from the user. It sounds very cynical, but it is true. If the user tells you that this has always been done that way, or if he says that since the organization was started in 1866, we have been maintaining the books of accounts in this particular way, accept it, soothe tempers, be very polite, but ask the question why. If the user doesn't know, ask his boss. If his boss doesn't know, ask his boss. You may end up asking the managing director or the chairman about a very trivial item or a trivial piece of information, but you may also end up by discovering that the information which is supposed to be so very important was important only at a certain time, a few years back, due to certain circumstances, and now is not being used at all. Okay. Last thing which we have to consider in the questions is when is the right time to ask and where is the right place to ask. Both these questions are more common sense than anything else, but there are certain ground rules which we will have to consider. Let's take these ground rules one by one. First of all, when you talk to a user, always make an appointment. Don't ever drop into a user unannounced because that will look unprofessional and rude. Why unprofessional? It is unprofessional because the user will think that you are behaving in a very ad hoc manner, you have not prepared yourself and you are just dropping in and asking him questions. Why is it rude? It is rude because the user may think that you don't think he or she is important enough to be informed in advance that you are going to come there and ask questions. The next thing, you must always plan for your meetings. Always plan your meetings, always have an agenda prepared for it, and give the agenda to the user at least a couple of days in advance so that the user is always prepared. Remember, an unplanned meeting implies an unprepared user, which is finally to your disadvantage. Because what might happen is, you may go for a meeting, an unscheduled or unplanned meeting, and go there, ask questions to the user is not prepared at all, and therefore what you might end up doing is to schedule another meeting, by which time the user would have gathered all the information and kept it ready, and you would have lost that much time. So always plan for your meetings. Next thing, ensure that the user has enough time for you. Make sure that you don't go there when he is in a hurried way or when he is busy with something else. Also try and see you don't schedule a meeting just before lunch. Because what you might find out is, In the middle of the meeting, the user switches off from the meeting and starts thinking about his lunch instead. Make sure you choose a time when the user is not hopefully going to be bothered by various routine phone calls, etc. Next thing to consider is make sure the meeting is kept in the user's workplace. There are two reasons for this. The first is that the user has access to various documents, files, any papers, his subordinates in case he needs to find out something or he needs to make some clarifications. Secondly, the user will be on his home ground, so he will be more comfortable. He will not feel threatened or he will not feel intimidated by foreign surroundings. The next thing is make sure the meeting is held in a neutral meeting ground. The neutral meeting ground could be a conference room, it could be a meeting room, which could be close to the user's workplace so that he has the advantage of having access to documents, but he should be out of it. He should be out of it so that he can at least not be bothered by the routine phone calls. Okay. Make sure of the basic ground rules. Okay. What you must have seen is that one particular question was missing. That question is how. How is the work done? How is the factory or organization or department doing its work? What are the procedures? Now this particular question was missing because it was a deliberate missing. It was missing, the reason why it was missing was because system investigation is concerned with reasons and not with methods. You need to find out why a particular thing is being done and not how it is done. System investigation deals with the information flow or the actual information which is being passed and not the physical nature of that. For example, information will be passed from one department to the other. Now it does not matter whether you take box files from one place to the other or whether the two departments are connected by a computer and the information flies through on the network. These issues are immaterial. What is important is the information which goes through, and it is vital to distinguish between data and between methods, because what happens most times is system investigators get bogged down by the methods or by the procedures which the user is following. That is more so because even the user is more comfortable with procedures rather than with the information flow. But it is up to you to make sure that you keep him on track and tell you what the information is and not what the methods or the processes are. Let's see if we can illustrate better with an example. Suppose you ask the purchase clerk, department clerk, how he prepares a purchase order. Most likely what he will tell you is, he will say we take this paper and we write it out or we print it from the computer and we put it in this envelope and we address it to the vendor and we send it by a courier if the vendor is a local vendor, or we send it by registered post if it's a out of station vendor. Then we keep one copy of the purchase order in this particular file which is customer wise. We keep one copy of the purchase order in this file which is date wise. Then we send one copy to the stores. Again, this copy we send it either through a messenger which within the departments, like we send our office peon maybe, or we send it just post it in the mailbox for each department. Then we send one copy to the finance, one copy to this, etc., etc., etc. If you see carefully what he's been talking about the processes or the procedures of what he's doing. The actual information is hardly anything. That is more so because the user also is more concerned with how he's doing a particular thing rather than what or why is it being done. What you need to know, on the other hand, in the purchase order is what is the information in the purchase order. Okay, is the vendor's name there? Do you have any contact person out there, or do you just address it to anybody? Do you have different addresses for the head office, for the branch offices? Do you have maybe two different addresses, one a mailing address, one a different address? What are the terms and conditions of payment? Are they to be included in the purchase order, or do you send a separate letter, or are they standard for different customers? What are the kind of customers do you have? All this information is what you really need, and that is not something which the user will give you, because he or she is more concerned with the way of getting things done. So therefore, this is a very, very important consideration that you have to keep in mind, and something which is very difficult to maintain. So all the more reason why I am emphasizing it so much. Now to summarize what we have done so far, we have started on the topic of system investigation, which is another term for requirement analysis. We have seen that requirement analysis really talks about the needs of the user. We have seen what a user is. We have seen the different types of users, how to classify them, how to identify them. We have seen the importance of an organizational chart. We have seen the importance of lines of control, whether they are visible or invisible, whether they are hidden or not hidden, how crucial the hidden lines of control are. Then we have looked at system characteristics. We have seen the 8 different system characteristics that most systems have. We have identified them. We have seen what each of them are. We've given examples. We've also seen an example where we have listed out the characteristics, so we know what they are. We have seen what kind of questions are we going to ask a particular user. When do we ask a user? There are certain ground rules which we have considered. What is the right place to ask the users? We have also considered the most important question, which is why is something important? Why is something done? This is something which, again, I would like to emphasize a little bit, because most people forget about the question why, or they take it for granted. If the user is telling them something, it must be true. That is not so. You have to find out why exactly something is being done. So we've talked about the question why. We've also seen why the question how was not asked. How is something done? How does this particular department operate? The procedures or the methods are not important. What is important is the data or the information. That is the most important thing which we have seen so far. Actually, the 2 most important things we have seen in this session have been the question why. You must always ask the users why a particular thing is done, and not to ask the user the question how, as to how it is done or what are the methods which he is following. We will end with this. Thank you very much.